Recording in progress.
Tiếng Việt là tiếng Tây Tạng lần thứ 3. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Heart's assembly, until I am enlightened, I take refuge. From the virtuous merit that I collect by practicing giving and other perfections, may I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings not be separated by the happiness that is without suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Cho đến khi đạt đến giác ngộ, đệ tử xin quy Tam Bảo, Phật, Pháp và Tăng, nương nhờ công đức hạnh bố thí, ba la mật và các ba la mật khác. Đệ tử xin nguyện đạt đến giác ngộ để cứu độ mọi chúng sinh. Xin nguyện cho mọi chúng sinh an lành và tạo nhân để được an vui. Xin nguyện cho mọi chúng sinh giải thoát khỏi khổ đau và tiêu trừ các nhân tạo khổ đau. Xin nguyện cho mọi chúng sinh không lìa an vui, tức là không phải chịu khổ đau. Xin nguyện cho mọi chúng sinh an trụ trong hạnh xả, không chấp thủ và sân hận với những chúng sinh chấp thủ xa gần. Sangye cho tăng cho ke cho nam la chẳng cho ba đường ta ni kẹp su chi da ge jin so ge ve so nam ge do la pen cho sangye du ba so sam chen tam che de wa tang de we chu tang den ba chu chi Sam chen tam che du nghêu tăng du nghêu chi chu tăng rêu hoa chu chi Sam chen tam che du nghêu mê phê de hoa tăng mi rêu hoa chu chi Sam chen tam che nghi mê cha tăng mi tăng rêu we tăng nam la ne pa chu chi. Page 43.
Page 43, Mandala offering.
Mandala offering.
Sangham Biwa Ishu Om Danja Bome Ahu Wanje Seke Sashi Om Danja Reke Ahu Chichari Koyo Ke Koe Usuri Gewariram Shalva Polon Zamboli No Palanche Chandramine Le Dan Le Pa Ayadan Ayashem Lendenda Lam Jodo Daminyan Daminyan Gita Rinpoche Jewo Pasan Gishin Beje Pama Pa Eloto Kolo Rinpoche Tsumo Rinpoche Lambo Rinpoche Rinpoche Dajo Rinpoche Mabe Rinpoche Tembe Rinpoche Techema Ye Pomba Gema Chewama Loma Garma Medoma Chewama Nasema Chichama Nima Dawa Rinpoche Chole Namba Geve Genze Uzola Mi Penjo Puson Sopa Matsawa Mi Sanshin Yido Teta Chinchen Zawa Tangi Vachi Pande Lama Tamba Namta Kewa Toya Yongi Gewe Shenyen Chenpo Gen Rinpoche Chebye chone tekwa chimbe sunje samo shuye yendo shingam bewa ike tujin joye tendo sheso chene ganda zon dongyo mangyo namge tadan nyambe semjen tamje tu zawan shimbe gone sishin chodan tumon gengocho le wan tse to se zo ye be jo ye me lo jam re ra lin she de ge boy de Vanye shende me tembe maye Dogen anda shen che vasho zo ye shon Ozayan Kimbe Yeshe Nawa Ye Ramjam Shunlo Mawe Pedu Naman Duja Thabkhe Tuma Ye Gyonze Shenye Chimbo Shabden Sho Savyan Kimbe Yeshe Nawa Ramjam Shunlo Mawe Pedu Naman Duja Thabkhe Tuma Gyonze Shenye Chimbo Shabden Sho
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, doctor. Gol shah, gol. Go. Oh yeah, that's it. That's this. Oh, oh, that's it. Oh yeah, good. Go right.
This game,
Nah,
on go to the next.
no, let me show.
Less.
Nah,
Go to less.
this one.
Now.
Oh, this. Oh, that can be how Oh, the Geshe ma show lesson. Then you didn't never shin the cars. You can do about you, but getting de la Pamba Maduna Chin, the others of what color yours. Okay, so that you bought it. Then you didn't never shin the cars. Arazo Tawa get and Jorbachu San Tandotobe Miludi Sungora. Oh, Jenny Chumambo, Chong Amatoma Mosane. And it's that Tomabusana and any neighbor, the Matulela was in the neighbor Madisungora. Then you didn't never shin the cars. Chitam Milu Tobal Tomabusa would get on the Sanjay Tambatan Roa, and it get and Jorbachu Same militant to the Shidoku Buresua. Then you didn't never shin the cars. If you can do Tobachu Balas. Kibu Garazu Tin Dita Maimba. You are Chima Pajaka Tanda Kachimutumna, Ruega Kugabi or Resungora. If you can do Tobachu Balas. When I Garazu Messidi, Rachimuti, Sindi, Oku Chanja Tanda. And it tried the Nyan Chong. And the Chanja Tanda, the Sochu Wena. ne pe phambo re so gora inde tanda samde tanda zo ga che to gure se ora zo so so kyang ko de kyang khala che ko de che chang do se u tu ya bu ta do che kang ga che to do ne pa jen ko ne che se jen hi che dan de nyen jun de ko ra to pa tu kang ga che to go ra o tinde se ne ko tanda che to gure ne tanda lu lang ba da ke ba chi ke ma jo de tele ha ba chi che gure so gora tele la bu ka ri che wo se ne sentiment di chigbu tanda tsawa ma chukche sentile tewa da chima pembe ane chu chukure esa gora yajende nyeba shinduka kibi tanda se kibi tanda chukure se kiwa chima penje tanda chukure se gora na kibi tanda nga zon namgini shemana shidira kiwa chima ale tangbu tala lada mele kiba shi gora tanda ma kibi che di tanda chukura ile tsawa panga yamba chukwe tiche tele lagba kibi tanda yuna koale tarbe chido 다음에 동반이 kom 메다바 참고 kom으로 두체 탐제 메다바 세 사체 탐제 동아와서도 동해지라시 코알 동해 밀리케나 동해여밖에 kom 아니 내가 요만배와게 소소를 라와메바 코아케 롱고 이치치고에 텐데시 마지바 치고도 땐도 타고 치고 삼사 땡고라 이분 딩긴 님불라고라 어디부터 치소나 담보
So here today, as yesterday, a similar sort of thing to begin with, as the Master Shantideva says, the life of leisure and endowment that we have right now is extremely difficult to find, and we can use it to accomplish the aims of beings. So if we don't use it for our purpose right now, then how could we possibly have this again in the future? So similarly to what we've discussed before, the life that we have right now with all of the kind of leisures and endowments, the opportunities to be able to practice the Dharma, there are so many causes that we have to have come together in order to be able to find such a life. It doesn't come about causelessly, but rather we have to have accumulated many virtues in the past in order to get such a rebirth, not just a human rebirth, but with all of the kind of freedoms and endowments. And so this is something that is extremely rare, but we can use this in order to achieve the aims of beings. And here, this is something where on the basis of this kind of life, we can achieve a vast benefit for others, meaning beyond just the concerns of this life. If we really use this, we can achieve happiness in future lives. If instead we just sort of spend our lives sustaining ourselves, like taking care of our needs, our hunger, our thirst, building our houses, subduing our enemies, protecting our friends, then there's really no difference between our life as a human and that of an animal. Animals as well are able to do all of those things to get what they need in terms of those kind of survival, their food and their shelter and so forth. But really, what we have in a human rebirth, in this kind of human rebirth, is the ability to think beyond this life, to achieve those goals in the future. And so as we talk about all of the time, there are levels of taking meaning from this life. The first stage being ensuring that we have a good rebirth as a human or a god by abandoning harming others and engaging in activities to benefit them. And the kind of middle being sees that even though that kind of life as a human or a god is not the suffering of the lower realms, it's still in the nature of suffering. And thereby one meditates on selflessness, the kind of subtle selflessness, thinking about the various seals of Buddhism, that all phenomena are impermanent. Everything that is contaminated is suffering. Everything is empty and selfless and so forth.
Ibi tendu tawa kiwala tanda kibu chungwe tanda kibu dringi tanda kibu chembe tanda rangi samlu tanda paa che nambu che nipa che zidrat masu kone konde adre tanda tuwedawa kibu tendu tawa kiwala ketin dila pemba madu na chindi anda joba kala jose tari tup tube ten dita bu tomne dili ata sosu kiwa chima penjel pembe Tanda Maduna, Mount Banana did the military top shindo in the car, Songora. And my tour to draw as only tour to draw any I lay a kabuchi got on military at a kabuchi got on. Chindi and that's over color Jurus. Oh, do Tanda. Church over the church over the church and washing with on because they took 2 months so Agura. Church the caresse. Yo chimang has only made you had a military to Dalia. Niri Mechinalia, Lunga used to go on a shell at Sawapa. Shall Chini temperature at the church redwa, should down with it. Oh, Tinitilla Lawa Cheveneta, call a 10 to Tarbursam. Call Millikin and Halikin to make it on Shichama Mutusam. Teletarba Chichegusam. Till Kichi Judy Parkan, till Kichi Judy, Yomocha, Yomo on the sub leather redora. Yomo with Sawading, something on Zidi redora. Some Garawa, Changai, some Shukchimbache. And then I told you go suit to Japan water. Tezuda meeting Tezula never can get that. Social Nazos, Conzos, social chokes on Saturday Metuna, and the Condor Yang Trato get in the Chigua. What he did doesn't matter, so the church never did it. Condor I get a Trato than Jansimta. Here it was, and it touches somebody else did that. Simjeta at Namjing as a dead. Manzo Simjek Ganga, Joanne, Joa Mambo, Joa Tameba Sonda, Sendile Soso Panto Wanashi, and the Chishu de Suina. In the Joangamanam Supendo Chimbut Machinga Simjen D, Ngay Pama Jurwadi D, a draws of Wadi Carsoda, Bugupudu Jurwadi say, Di Majure says Opera. And then as a Kijipin and Homash every mother, so the cheat get chewed up into the conduct and the mirror of Suina, Joangamasu conduct and the Chahago Yamara. Mato da Juderwa, or T. Ducar soda. Simje dilependo and dilepemato serre medu samje. Samali chibache, the one de la tunga meduba in Chinja, initial so much as a pember tree. You would chimbus, chanju symbols, dilesem changora. Oh, the Zuliatene, Lo Changores, the children, so some tanjota, Lunga usum cholam to lepgodoa. Yiri mecenal, Tilly Caban Rogutunani, Yabuchiora. Yili Cabagan Rogumenation, Dakar Chivin, and church number Taborea Comoredua. In the Zanko Church, you would say the Sedekanga Luta, and it and Chisona de to Yomato, Susan Messicura. Sedilia, Susu Chambada, Saw Shella, Pendor, Madon, never Majim, Messi Abuja Segura, teacher Segura. He can also a penguin, Namila penguin, Sama Pengiora, Shidiche Yabungura, Sula Tramasa, Condumanga Gemena, Simjeche, Soso Lagage and Roshana, Yabudua. The Deche Segura, teacher and Kawachima, Namin Debu de Yongude Songura. Kaja churches the Kawachiment and Daraja Sendi Kaga Yusha, Tende Samakoti Sigomara. Church did send Dilichura. Pendo de Deliora, said Tawasura, Tambechuni. Tomar Kewasida, Penda Tewasida. There was a Chendil Society Yongude. Chima Pemba Yongur, Pens, the Namin Jebune, the Chima Pemba, Pemba Asura, Pus Pemba, Negab Tewa, Pus Pemba. Negab Dewas, the Chendilia around the Shen Society Bakaki Yongora. Marazu Chud and Metimba Chudin, Sosu Megibas and May Megibas. Ibayata Jusa, and it Doshara Shishara. Kilet and rekindle to the Yara Segura, should I take Basaya Kayamara? Saya Tonga General Corante Doshara Saya did. Oh, did should they have one washing machine? Kibuchungu than drink the temperature and washing machine. They can't jet to do so. Messina Yongudo with Tavura. Oh, do you do that, Mabushia Mara? Oh, then Tanjugan Millie Cabbage and Toby Lundiroa. And then Joachima Page Tanda Demba Chendilla Tower. Chima Pember and church in Samsa. Shala Toa Pamba. Nazuda Consus and Yeri Chatan Neva. Agbe Shancheba, Chuna Tamate. Solo Chang, Soso Catch and Bumachi, Simji Shank Shawachi, Soso Pamat and Yandela Sobamacheva Megatic Shawachi. Oh, the nature de Juju Chamber Sungatanda, Shutamja Donstame Stammy Sungura. Digitamja Metabas, Sajatamja Tungawa, Chutamche Tameba, Yangeli Deva, Shiva Sungudwa, Medabari Samlatangudwa. Yuchetanjimida, Sarchetimja Tunga, Koala Kiwajana, Sakbasu, Yomonsor. Yomo Wagi Kiwajalan, Chinjatele, Tungema, Tatele, Tungachi, Yungre, Karjana. Noa. Yuchetanjim, Sarchetimja Tunga, Chutamche Damebase. Rangwe Tayo Mare, Shen Rangwe Tayo Mare, Rangwe Duyoma, Rangwe Suyo Mare, Rangwe Migyo Mare, Nayo Mare, Nayo Machima, Majushirab Budua, Migme Nomene. Mig said the Kochikan did it, Tayo Mare, Chilo Pagwada, Nalo Tada Lunda, Shibojula Thursday, and then Migo was a suit on at Chagdua. Chikanjin DJ say Omarwa, make me nowadays. I'm just trying to the Mambo, son, any. I'm just trying to Lung man, try to hear me do Ahmaja. But you need to Lung Gengage many try to hear me do. Jaco Mambo just saw it, you the Mambo saw it. Now I'm a round Ayomara. Now I may Jimmy long chase I get so try to do Recha. Tell a tie again, make now and now cheer you so bad. Oh, tennis also number shibal so but there's about never come at the let. I'm about Tomba years ago. Think I'm to shake you. Young Ellen Deva she was the Congo Danga Jedan, young egg Judy, Tungerva, Tunge Ju so the Yomorva. Yomo never take any time, Yomopa, Yange, Yomobapa, or Mishiba Mombapa. There's a saying any time young Ellen Devane she show, Tadugi show, Tadugi Tawa, or Tirisungudwa, or Tis of the Tedezi Tobacha Namdo. Yechi the church we use some Tobacha Sambache. Yanayando Kayo and Yamlichi in Samsa. Jachunian and Nichunia, the Kawate, Mambusagra, Igba Mambutagio, the Kawa Mambusagre, or the Kachin in Suna Mambusagri, some Sosu Samgurua, Sosu Kewale Kawakomuri, Shangi Kewale Kawakomura, Sosu Chet, or Tiringa Abucha, some Sosu Social Kawakomura, Sosu Kewala. Oh, yeah, Tende Sambutan, Chesember shoes, then
So here, as it says, we can use this kind of life for our benefit. The level of the middling scope is thinking about getting out of samsara, the sufferings of samsara, by meditating on selflessness and so forth. But here on the level of the great scope, we are thinking about in order to benefit all sentient beings, in order to sort of be able to develop our own mind. We are looking at all sentient beings as having acted as our kind sort of mothers and fathers. And it is through in this way that we're able to sort of develop these various stages, beginning with the being of small scope, then the middling scope, then the great scope. And really, if we don't use this life that we have right now, then as Shantideva says, how could we possibly have this again in the future? It's so extremely difficult to create the causes. If we fall into the lower realms, we just sort of continue to fall lower and lower and lower. And so as we often talk about, we need to do Dharma, we need to practice the Dharma. And in order to practice the Dharma, we need to understand what that is. What is it that we are trying to practice? And so at the first level, it is recognizing that we need to gain a good rebirth in the future. We need to avoid harming others. We need to benefit them as much as we can in order to ensure that we don't fall into a situation without any kind of freedom. But then seeing the kind of defects of our afflictive emotions, that really the source of all of our suffering, even if we are to gain a good rebirth, it is still in the nature of suffering. And the real root of that is our various afflictions, the root of all of which is this grasping at an I. We hold to an I, and then we hold to mine, and so forth. And so it is from holding to this kind of like I, as if it were autonomously, independently existent, and this mind that seems to exist from its own side. We want the best for ourselves and so forth, and thereby give rise to anger and jealousy and pride and competitiveness and so forth. And so recognizing the defects of those afflictions, making an effort to reduce our attachment and anger and our self-grasping. This is really the practice of the being of middling scope, to work on those kinds of afflictions. And then going beyond that, recognizing that all sentient beings, like if we think about the sentient being who has shown us most kindness in this life, whether it's our mother or whoever it might be, other than not recognizing that they have acted as that way, all other sentient beings, I mean, we have countless rebirths in the past, and all sentient beings have acted towards us in this way. I mean, we're thinking like, oh, there's a dog next to me, and that's just a dog. But in a previous life, that being has shown you great kindness. So other than not recognizing that, we should see that all sentient beings, if we really think about it, have shown us this great kind of kindness. And thereby, we want to be able to benefit them. This is the kind of attitude wherein we learn to value and cherish others and develop this kind of bodhicitta attitude, the mind that really values others. And so the practice of Dharma is changing our way of thinking based upon understanding these levels of practice, and really based upon that thinking, that way of transforming our mind, we then see a change in the way that we think and act in our everyday life. If we are just sort of saying prayers or saying the words, but nothing about our thinking or behavior changes, that's not really Dharma. So right now we have this kind of good life. We have the ability to be able to use it for something positive. And if we comport ourselves in this way, where we're really thinking about not harming others, reducing our afflictions, and thinking about the defects of our self-cherishing, then this is going to bring us happiness in this life. We often talk about doing these kinds of things for a benefit in the future. Well, that benefit is the kind of ripening result, but we end up experiencing the kind of happiness from these actions in this life as well. Acting in this way is how we live a good life. And so when it talks about like giving up this life, it's not as though we neglect completely all of the activities, but rather through the Dharma, we live and we think and we comport ourselves on a daily basis such that we are able to bring about happiness here and that kind of benefit in the future. So animals don't have the ability to create such a positive kind of result. I mean, they can comport themselves in a way where maybe they're not doing as much non-virtue as we humans can do. But they aren't really doing anything that's greatly beneficial in the future. So we need to understand the kind of condition that we have right now and valuing that. Take care of it, use this life wisely in order to be able to benefit ourselves and others in the future. So again, that begins with this abandoning harm, abandoning harming others, and benefiting them as much as we are able to in order to be able to gain a good rebirth in the future. And then getting rid of our affliction, seeing the defects of our attachment and our anger, our self grasping, and then seeing the kind of faults of self-cherishing. We overcome that self-cherishing attitude and develop bodhicitta. This is the way that we train our mind. And so by recognizing that all, as the Buddha has said, all compounded phenomena are impermanent, and all that's contaminated is in the nature of suffering, meaning that which arises from the afflictions is in the nature of suffering. And all phenomena are selfless. At this here, we are discussing the kind of subtle selflessness of phenomena. And so when we talk about selflessness, it's like, it's not that there is no I whatsoever, but there's no autonomous, no independent existent I, like the self. Or, nor are there, as we see in like the Heart Sutra, for example, it says no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, so forth. When we look at, say, our visual sense power, where is that exactly? We feel like there's something that's there, existent from its own side. But when we look through all of the various sort of parts and components, we can see that there's no like thing that we can point to. Or like our ears, they have the ability to hear sound, but when we try to point to, well, where is that sound without the sort of movement of that, the wind of that, all these various causes and conditions coming together, we can't perceive sound. And so the things that we enjoy, the various objects of our senses, our sense powers, the consciousnesses, all of these we perceive as being somehow like autonomously, independently existent, but they don't actually exist in that way, like we see enumerated in the Heart Sutra, for example. And so the main cause of all of our suffering is that fundamental ignorance. And in order to be able to get rid, like if we are able to get rid of that, this is how we achieve the sort of final ultimate happiness. As the fourth seal says that nirvana is peace, when we are able to pacify, remove that kind of affliction. We achieve that state of peace, that freedom from that cause of suffering, which is the final cessation, that final sort of peace. And so here we should have the kind of attitude of listening to the Dharma, thinking that I'm going to practice as much as I can throughout my life, just on a daily basis, try to accumulate virtuous activities. And in doing so, in trying to put the Dharma into practice in my daily life, I'm going to accumulate so much positive action and purify negativities as well. And we should take joy in the kind of virtue that we do, increasing it and enhancing it more and more. And so with this kind of attitude of recognizing that we need to understand the Dharma in order to put it into practice, we should set our motivation for listening to these teachings, thinking that we are going to try to implement this in our life and use it for our benefit.
Jangan de ma she de ame be tongba ni she yora. Tenji te ta le do sa. Lo lenji ge tang si se che che. Kunda si ni yong do. Mara zo samlo na le. Mang she wa le lenji te yora. Nga samsa nga rawa to ba be. Lo lenji te yora nga shu ge yora. So ya ga re chung so na nga ji shu che ge de do re chung so nga le chung sam shu che ge ra. Ele nga ji lenji se yora. Lo lenji rang shin gi sam ko gu do nga zo shen na re chung na o ta nga shi sam ja nga de be nam ji de men ra sam shu che ko gu do ya ga re chung na da ji na re chung na da o ti ka la ma nga yong go ra nga ji se bu shu che re chung go ra ele lenji se go ra yu sen sam lu tang ko ma ro ko ra ta ga se rang shi yong de yon zhu yan che liu ra nga ra zu me ka go ra ele lenji se do o ti ka ra zu ye tang bu chi ro che ha ko ra nga se nga de rang de sam ko do sobuda semda chowa da tezula tenji dene sha ko ya chi membership kora rang zu to bor che kora rang ja tumbe nga rang ye se re chi sam ko da o ti sigora nga rang to ba rang shin ji to ba rang ne to ba shiram ni mu de yong da che tam ja rang shin ji tong ba nam ba ya da ba che su ta o su da kora rang shin ji to den shen da ge ro ba che ne che me go ge shen da ro ba che ne le pa ta ni tin de me go ge Kurang rang shiki tsu ngaran di yin sayar chi tsu yon tenge suli samlu kogu da o dili ya tangzi si ora tongme marikba si tenri yangla chungi shidi di shi yora tangbu kyang kanga yon sa shidi tine yon gora nga sam nga rwa ini ngayi samsa ngayi wa ngayi mi ngayi lu ngayi chi shi ini ngayi nyendre ngayi nangmi ngayi chi shi sayar ini ngayi lungba ngayi chi lu chi ba nganzu lungba konzu lungba sayar ane chakdaan che kanga tene ya yungura shi tsusaru te tene tsugu wara tsawa te tere te wara matisi tela lenje te kanga li wara ta kunda se de tupde wange chiriba to zina o nga tende chi yore da nga rawa chi yore sobo da teso pa sha teso ten jawa ke yo mara kora rang tsu togo yore akba chikbu rawa yore sigora takwa sine juwa me kuge, juda kengi chue me kuge, judo me ge, takwa. Kichi li juwa dugu tende che me kuge, takwa. Yene, chikbu, rokpa chiye kwa mara, kora rang kora chikbu ya rang zu tup tu de. Kumbu nga da, tenje, relwa da, tende kwa mara, kora chikbu, nga rangi yo se re, kora rang zu tup de. Rangya tuwa, rang zu tuwa se ra. Yene che yo samgidwa. 딱 찍세 참에기 찍부사 차치에게 요 말에 라즈르네 컴버리네 참마부치에 요라 다음지네 소보다 셈다 소와다 도시데 참마부치에 근데 그 말. 그래서 거라 로가래 나가 거라 딱바 찍부 라와치 요레스 요라 어디 산게 좀 된데 페네 근데 요 말에 성거라 근데 두다 제제 봐 리바 마부탄 그래 그래서 갈래 봐 tenzi rigbase, tsema rigbase. Jusen samlutane, samlutangdane, shenge solata, ti rigbatane shegara, ti marese jusen. Tensa ngaranzu cheni, chig labade chugda, ti mare dinde resana, chagdanga sura chagdwa, ngaranzu chagdang shuk cheda chone. Sosu te shene, dine peche yuna, ti marese, tu namsan chagdanga samlu chukudwa. Sosu te le kabuche, yaku shibi yisa, pajo te yaku maresam. Sanje da, ngeme keba tu sundi ti marwa. Ngone norka do sam, kyon shimbu shivchi resam. Ko yangdak betanda da ha kona sam. Ike kyon chigi yore sam. Nga sam rawa takbo tenpa shivachi yoga zindu, ane shukchimbu nganji shukchimbu shivchi yora. Pungbu dona to maa kemna shina shi kachini zi, taa kage chiya yo mara, me metsu, chu metsu, kage chiya yo mara. Logo labgu yora, lo shukchimbu. Chokchile ko penyere che yorwa, nga di shukchimbu le chi yorsa. O ti cheni ko, rikpe cheba mambu chiya de, 미주 미시베 몽발에 저 노르바디 파 양다바디 오네 디시나 삼 리버타지 디마르 디르스 셰기와라 마도체 나라즈 메시지 감비케바 메시지 네 결한테 마르야고 망가지 디에세 차그당 그죠 말에 잠바다 세와 그네라니 어 디노르게 와레 삼 양다바디 디르스 디마르 딜케 디르 두송기와라 간지 슉첨부여나 아니 가이 슉첨부네 가주도 콘주스 녀모데 착제 대기로 와. 내 소소 규주 땅에 개요 말을 두스 때로 와. 인데요 말에 소소 규주 땅에 요래. 어디도 가서 땡줄레체 쏠라 창베치 만제 남도 신팅 데스가. 땡줄이야 슝갑수 도나레 트워틀레 셔지 망보 연구도 와. 지지 가래서 지지레서 대지 칠시나세. 가르제네레스나 딘데레스 년도 도서 파서 감메시 딘데 셔지 치도 와. 야고 퍼조데 몽바데 나르샤삼 테 양닥 바지 신나삼 와 녀몰레 트나삼 와 콜렉바 네중고네데 신네 녀몰레 트나삼 제 티텐달야 자와체지 셰거로 마도제 나라주 den산에 시카리게나 시마레 카셰 den산 생겨라 어 베제나 치초바 마모초데 야오 마레 밀리아 야오 마레세 나라주 착당게 지템베 쩌바쩌다데 임베 삼겨라 어디에디 슝나라 망부여라 그래서 제바체 어디 당전바다 치료받아도 다 딱지랑와체 다 요시 당전바세게 셰유방한자 아빠 지부 랑와체 셈 다다 셰바 리바 기부 찍바레 먼저 셰바세데 콘도 달스요래 다다 셰바 리바 기부 뇽아 유뇽세시도가 다들이하고 롱주신 제메신게 시거래 지소세 저고 땅부 강가 줍중게치 멤버를 더도 줍어치 속바치와라 어디 강가 콜세미오 말데 이불 고야데 가르코도 사에 통해 고야 가르코도 강가 거기 줍주비에시거라 제신라 삼메시메스 롱제메시메스 콜세미오 말 롱제신도마 기부데 롱제신게와라 지소 때문에 고랑 제신게와 말에 어떤데시거라 자티 다 셰바르 기부 딱지라만 제 다데요 말에세 오 티연아니 가 삼장간지 슉침부지 그래 디왕게니 차가 슉침부지 그래 디제나니 고아코테 그래서 나라주 강가에 타고 토야 요아레스 촉도 주바레 요아레스 나도 타고아레스 수스땡게 말에세 수수 베바체네 야르야르도야 요아레 티셰가라 이제 꾸넬라니 셰가라 이나시 지대기 제바부 요 말을 산제 좀데 소고라 소디사 테라 오 챈다지 나도 소고요레 삼나 소소 네버게요 말에 챈다 겨 상부타나타 냠발타나타 우조 카바타나타 틸리아 케스네 테 말에 테 용고 요시에요 말레스 인데지 여바 이나데 강가 야부 수르 마도 두부 수고 말레스 나라조르 실리나 강가 소야 왕제요나 야부 자르 마도 냐와 예다 돈도 수고 마로 하데 당부 수도 그게 맨 코라 라바 요네 시고다 뭐 뒤도 갈소다 옛날가 친구요다 소소 개코제 소소 교주다 그래 소소 셈을 교주다 능아에서 교주다는 야르야르요라 셈디 야르야르야 괜세게 시기죠 그 소소 개체부로 소소 레다 녀모 소소 삼로 소소 군주 이 랭일 때는 야르 두고 간가 연구래서 이슈 겨요라 대강가 소소 여거든 or Narandi Naracha would some such. So much of the shandy, I live down should Kashayan Shan Lu Kirakari in the chest or Rochising on the Hama was in Seba Kiba Unit and the Riche Yungura to Pando Yungura. So Tabarish to stay so do some of the Dima, Nadukanga Saji Riore, Andre or Sogora, or Digilaption, Mansoa. And that repeat Chebachiate, Chagda member, Rawa, Nizungone the Shea, Chabata Sevetone. Di mare di ne kyo di lu yuen den di yor den de ti shen mi samlo tang shen ge shin ngoi ne zu da ha ku ba de ba de chum ba se de ha ku yan do ba chum ga jil china ko ambu tsa na ha ma gu ge chi she ne ngo ne yen ba de ba mem ba so ya do ba o ti na shen ngoi bi ne chu de ne lu de ko yin ba mem ma nga ra zu samlo tang de no ra da ma no ra ma bu yo ra o de zu ka ga che ton da ne ru ba che ma bu yo ra o ti ji lam ne wa.
So here, this kind of innate grasping at a self, this needs to be kind of distinguished from what we call sort of a learned or intellectually acquired grasping at a self. So this innate grasping at a self is something that's like naturally arising. We all have this thought of I and like mine, my body, my wealth, whatever it might be. And so this naturally arising innate self-grasping, this is something that becomes really sort of vivid or clear, especially at times like when there's something really good that happens to us, or something is very fearful. We feel really afraid or scared, or something bad, someone criticizes us. There's this sense of like, it's sort of stronger, more clear, that like we don't need any reasons for this. We don't have to think about it. It just naturally arises. All sentient beings, we have this sense of like this I that is autonomous, that's not dependent or dependently designated upon anything, but just exists in and of itself, like exists in its own right, exists inherently. And so again, as it says in the Heart Sutra, we should come to see all phenomena as empty of inherent existence. That kind of inherent existence, what we're talking about there is something having a sense of like something existing in and of itself, like not dependent upon any kind of causes or conditions or parts or our mental designation, but existing without relying upon anything. So when we talk about this kind of this first ignorance, we have this thought of I that grasps at a self as though it were somehow autonomously existent in and of itself, existent in its own right. And then we think like my family, this is my side, my area, my town, that's the other. And thereby we give rise to attachment and hatred and all of the other afflictions. And so this I, this grasping at an I that is innate, is really the root, the foundation for all of the other kinds of afflictions that arise. And so here, when we talk about the kind of intellectually acquired or learned grasping at a self, this is the kind of self-grasping that comes through philosophical speculation, contemplation. So non-Buddhists, particularly like the Samkhya school that we went through last time, asserts that there is a permanent, unitary, autonomous self. This self is permanent in the sense that there's no cause. It doesn't depend upon any sort of causes, and it's not momentary in the sense of disintegrating moment to moment. And it's unitary in the sense that there's no, it's all by itself. There's no need for another. It's not dependent upon others. It's sort of self-sufficient, no parts to it, no dependence upon anything else, but exists in and of its own right. And then they say that it is something that is like autonomous, that exists by its own power. So when schools like the Samkhyas, for example, assert such a self, it is based upon their own kind of thinking. It's not an innate thought that all of us have. And when the Buddha then came along and said, no, there is no such self, refuted these various schools like the Samkhyas, he was putting forth these kinds of reasonings, not just to engage in debate, like not out of a sense of attachment to his own views and hatred or dislike for the other, but rather it's a wish to benefit them, wanting them to be able to know things as they are. And so the Buddha teaches and presents these kinds of reasonings out of a desire to help others come to an understanding. He's only teaching out of love and compassion. It's not to like dispute with others. It's not to undermine their ideas out of attachment to one's own, but rather it's something that is done out of a desire to help, a desire for others to come to understand the way that things are, to eliminate their suffering. And so there's that possibility in seeing what is taught in the sutras and the shastras. We say, wow, there's a lot of questions, a lot of sort of the Buddha debating other views and so forth. And we might think that, and this is largely because of this is the way that we do things these days, we dispute out of attachment and hatred. Often our kind of debating with others is coming from an attachment to our own views and a dislike for others. It's not out of a genuine wish to benefit others or really come to an understanding of the truth. And so the Buddha, though, is not doing this motivated by afflictions or just wanting to fight and dispute and so forth, but rather it's in order to bring others to understanding. So, as we were talking about last time, the refutation of a self that is asserted by the Samkhya's again assert that there is a self that is permanent, unitary, and autonomous. And self, like the person, self, consciousness and awareness, the experiencer, the sort of, these are all synonymous. And this self is separate from the kind of substantially existent, but unconscious primal substance. And this primal substance is sort of all the cause of all other kind of manifestations or things that this self then perceives. And so the refutation of such a self that the Buddha does by putting forth various logic and reasoning in order to undermine that view is because he wants others to come to a proper understanding of reality. And so we all have the ability to develop our understanding. And this kind of refutation of the self is in order to like bring us to that proper understanding. If we too engage in this kind of logic and analysis, we can come to understand the way that things are. We see other places, like for example the Buddha refuting a creator god. Refuting a permanent self is, as he has done before, is partially to encourage us to develop our mind, that we aren't static, permanent, unable to change, but rather if we do make an effort, we can improve and develop our mind. And so too, we all have this kind of Buddha lineage. We have that capacity, that ability. We're not fixed in our nature. And so too, when the Buddha refutes a creator God, it's sort of refuting that idea that we have been made by another and we don't have agency. We don't have the ability to change our own thinking and actions in order to develop. Like he points out things like, why would a god who is in the nature of love make suffering, make bad things, put beings in the hell realms and so forth? But rather it's the actions of our own making that bring us those kinds of results. And so the Buddha, again, really the essential point of this is that when we see that sort of argument and disputation, it's not about attachment to our own views, dislike for the views of others, but it's out of a genuine desire to bring benefit, to learn, and to bring others away from that kind of mistaken view, such that they are really able to understand the way that things are.
Mình có Phật tính, không có một cái đấng sáng tạo quyền năng nào để tạo ra hạnh phúc hay gây ra khổ đau cho mình. Giả sử như có một cái đấng sáng tạo toàn năng thì vì đó sẽ tạo ra những cái điều tốt lành, hạnh phúc cho thế gian. Sẽ không tạo ra những khổ đau cho
다다 쉐바 르바 기부스 다 시르기 기부스기도와 다다 쉐바 르바 기부 녀와 뒤딱바이 시고라 강사스네 티레 시고라 말아도 전에 쉐바 데고 강사 마르와 미기 쉐바 나웨 쉐바 네 쉐바 요르 콘도 요르 나제 요르 차도 계속간가 쉐바르데 다이 시고 말도 다 콘도 가서데 그냥 미기 쉐바스데 알아도나 소르비치나 고 미글레야 미와레 차르 아니 티파 세부체 통계 쉐바시키기도 와 미와다 나와다 세부에는 통구리 나고 있는 통마루와 아니 미글 차한테네 쉐바 건지 에티야메네 쉐바테 지루라 미기 쉐바 수 송도도 잖아 수 세부체네 통계도 쓰라 수 세부chen 티데 요네 통계들 수 송도도 잖아 통계게 쉐바 치와데 티고 미와레 때니께 아니 텔레테니 하고 지루라 쉐바테 메바 차그라 미다바라 나네시 트라송도도 챈스나 나웨 온볼레 때네 트라테 텔레테네 암주 탄다메넨 트라코에요 마라 텔레테네 쉐바치 트라디테 아니 티 트라디메네 쉐바테 지루라 트라테게 쉐바 지루라 나네시 티다 로다 렉샤 사디 장볼라 소바테조 카가 리와레 때네 네티차 텔레테네 쉐바테게 야티메네 코지루라 진짜 싫다 따탄다 다다 쉐바르 바키부강가 딱바예스나 수 통계게 야다 링부르스타 쉐르스타 링부르스타 디토데게 단진베 쉐바테서 다세부체네 통계 쉐바테 딱바르 베스고라 이 딱바이나 네콘 지에요 마라타가 되고라 근데 수르지 제소나 미기 수르지를 따스나야 수 세부체네 통에 쉐바케고라 근데 다데 당무코 다 세부체 통구여 버셔로 쉐바테 얘네 수르비질 방고코 수제 진소나 다 세부체네 통계게 쉐바테 메오레 마르베스고래 지쿠로 와서래 이 마지부체 단다 데오르베스고라 데 림부디 메네 다데 메나 다게 다 세부체 통계게 쉐바테 데오르베스고라 수디 다데 세부 특유어레스고라 이 특유 메거든 가지고 무슨 주고도 와서고라네 그 유디 메나 유디 세부체네 냐와 다니부체 통해치 오마라 디셰바데 지루도 와서래 게데스데 게데 트라이시 타나 세데다 그지마도 쇼르카 담불레바 게데 케라서 나시 트라세부체네 통계기 셰바데 딱바이나스고라 게데 트라이시 타나세 얘네 가시고스네 얘네 탐제체나 다진주스 네 미기 수통 로션다 사물타나 안다 트라디 테제 셰데 통데게 셰바데 데나 탐제체나 다진주스 이 탐제도 다진바주로 와서라 셰자 메나 치시르 데데 디렉 데그레고 수디 통계와데 얘네 수 통계 셰바데게 트라디에 테데그레스나스고라 이 트라디 메나 단다 그 트라디 테데그레스고라 유디 메네 아니 트라디 컨디스티브레스고라 디시도 카사 셰자 메버 치시 릭세드라 셰자 트라디 요 마로 트라디 메네 다 트라세브지 통계 셰바데 컨디스티브레스라 라 메버 차는 가라조 나웨 셰바겐 트라티웨 메버 차그라 디디코 셰자 메네 치시 릭 셰자 트라디 메버 차사르 디 메나니 트라디 세브지 통계 셰바데 데요 마로 와서고라 티 메나 다 미다버레도 딱버레도 와서고라 네 니까래 강게 셰바 시에서 시에자 다데 메나야 단다코 다시베 셰바레 세나스고라 시에자 다 메베레 사로와 단다 셰타야도 티 메베레 사로와 단다 단지베 셰바데 데기요나 아니 시에자 메데 어서래 강게 셰바 셰초제 셰바 가리젤라고 그랬어라네 다시베 셰바레 마서 타요 마르와시고라 어디 껴다도 티셔라 이데베 어디 소나 야자네
So here for the Thabkhe, and this comes then in verse 60, this is the refutation of the idea that there could be, again, a self that is somehow like the experiencer, the consciousness, for them, the person, consciousness, awareness, the experiencer is something that is permanent. Now, for us, we would say that consciousness, like say a visual consciousness perceiving form or an audio consciousness hearing sound, one has to have all of the sort of conditions. One needs to have a visual sense power that is functioning and be in the proximity of an object. That object sort of like has a sort of appearance to our consciousness, and we're able to perceive that. So we need to have, like, for example, when you're perceiving form, you need to have light. There has to be the right kind of conditions in addition to an object and a functioning sense power. And so here, these are all impermanent in the sense that they depend upon certain causes coming together. And so, for example, to be able to hear sound or any other of our senses, we need to have a functioning sense power. This is true for whatever of our sense powers and consciousnesses we are talking about. We have to have a proper sort of proximity to the object. We feel hot and cold on our body when we're in proximity to those objects. Or if we have the kind of conditions come together, there will be that appearance to consciousness of the object, but it doesn't remain. It's dependent upon various causes and conditions and is itself momentary. So here, as it says in this verse, if the awareness of sound, and here the Thabkhe is saying that awareness, consciousness, this perceiver is a permanent self, then sound would always be apprehended. If you're asserting that this self is consciousness and you have, say, a sound, an audio consciousness apprehending sound, then it would have to be apprehending sound at all times because of the fact that it is permanent. And so we know from our direct experience that this is not the case. Like if you're playing a flute or singing a song, that's something that is temporal, that doesn't remain forever, but rather the sound will come up, it's perceived, and then it's over. So here, the first sort of fault that would follow is that if awareness of sound were the permanent self, then sound would always be apprehended. If they try to say, well, even without an object, you have this permanent self, this permanent awareness or apprehender, then the question arises, in the absence of an object of awareness, what do you say would be known by what awareness? So if we don't have a sort of like a sound to be perceived, how can you assert that there is an awareness of something? How is something a consciousness or an awareness if there is no object which is perceived? So here, this brings fault with the idea that there could be a self that is somehow permanent, because again, it would have to be, in this case, perceiving sound at all times. There would be no time when it's not doing that. Or if you try to say that it's still awareness, this permanent awareness, even in the absence of an object, that also doesn't make any sort of sense. Because if there is no object cognized, then how can you speak of a consciousness of that or an awareness of that?
Nếu không có âm thanh làm đối tượng thì vì lý do gì mà nó được gọi là nhận thức của âm thanh? Cho nên mới hỏi như vậy. Nếu nó không có cái âm thanh tồn tại thì làm sao mà chúng ta có thể nói là cái nhận thức của âm thanh có tồn tại? Nên khi chúng ta nghe một cái tiếng nhạc, nếu bài nhạc đó nó là thường hằng thì lúc
the Shimishin Taku Lenjagura. Oh, Shicha Tati Mana, Kotashi, Shiba Takwaji, or is Shiba, you were Rigimaris now, Mirikwa Tamatusa. You Shicha Tati Mana, Tasung Dindi Chenishegi, Shiba the Meba, Tamatusi, what is Gora, Egre Gora. And this is the Getty Shimi, she inase. Shicha Mena, Tanda ko. Shicha Tadi Mana, Tanda Tra, Sabuchin, Turgegi, Shiba de Yus and Asigora. Getty she me, she in Asira, Shicha Mena, Tanda, de Sabuchin, Turbe, Shiba de Yuba in Asigora. Shinya Shiba Tawaji, you Mena, you many, you machine, Tanda Shiba Shachu Yuna, any shing the Sada Toto Shiba de Durwasigora. Sato to the Korean Shekumarwa. You machine, you man at Tanda Shiba is Tamana Tashiba Shiba is Lapchagun and Shingdo, Sata Totozo, Tashiba Shiba and Sukshiba Shiba and Shacho with Vesigora. Oh, Shinya Shiba Tower Jurse, Redu this, Taldu de Redu desigora. Then a Shicha near neighbor, a neighbor Shiba. Then I say, you say 10 hours or that. Shicha de Mena, Shicha de Sabuch and the Tongi Shiba de Mego with Eswara. Shicha Dam, Su, Ta, Tiruja Mena, this Sabuch and the Tongi Shiba de Never to Mego with Ese. Because Tena Shicha near never, Meba Shiba Mebani, Shicha de Yara Never Mena, Lingburista, Lingbuta de Meva Chasona. Shicha Tadi Limbu Tadi Mevachara. The Tungangi Shiba de Mevachar is what I this Sabuch and Tunga Shiba de Mev, never to Mevareku is what I. And a Shicha near never, Mevar Shiba meeting is a Shicha de Mana, this the Sabu to be Shiba de Meva never is, never to you took Mar, never to make good is it. What is to?
Ok, số 61.
So here, then, as a response to that, in verse 61, so the Samkhyas want to assert that there's this kind of permanent awareness, and they want to say that even without an object, like say sound, you could still have that awareness of sound. There would still be that consciousness, that permanent self. And so in 61, the first half says, if you assert that awareness exists in the absence of an object of cognition, then it would follow that a piece of wood could be awareness. So here, in order to have consciousness, you have to have an object of which it is conscious. That's the sort of definition of consciousness. So to assert that there could be a perception of an object in the absence of the object is absurd. It would follow that things like wood that have no awareness, no consciousness, would also become consciousness. If you could assert that there is consciousness in the abject of an object of consciousness. And so we would respond that if there is no form and sound and smell and taste and touch, then there can't be consciousnesses of those. We can't assert a visual consciousness without form and so forth. And so as it continues, really making the centrist assertion, thus it is certain that without an object of awareness present, there is no awareness. So like if we have a flute being played, as long as there's the sound of the flute, you can have and a functioning ear power, you can have an ear consciousness perceiving sound. But if that object goes, then there can't be awareness present. So as it says in the second half of verse 61, thus it is certain that without an object of awareness present, there is no awareness.
Oh, this you try to man the tube, the sandwich and the tube, shiver the day, you know. And it's try to be shiver the maybe come member and do this or that. You could to book with a nigger night to talk with this or that. Yeah, teach you. So.
Với những cái
So here, really, it's saying that if we have something like a perception of sound, and that awareness, that consciousness is asserted to be this permanent self, then it would have to be there at all times. If we have like awareness of sound, it would have to be present even when we are in deep sleep. There's no time when that would not be present, even in the absence of an object and so forth. And so these are the kinds of absurd conclusions that come from asserting a permanent awareness as the self, or a permanent awareness. But here in this case, they are asserting it as a self.
thì lúc nào nó cũng thường trực có cái biết về âm thanh. Thì như vậy thì chúng ta sẽ không có cơ hội để mà rơi vào giấc ngủ.
Don't do that. I would the worse. She's a member and a shiver member to a joy home or is Nadia. She's a man and shiver, she's a maybe shiver you but a joy home or is in Galia. To land of your tongue jamba. Oh, Carson. Tinikin is sushi nase. Oh, Tagi, that again to shiver the that the member chana, ya. That to be shiver to sushi the or sushi or say, because you maybe shiver chagmar or you. Sudi shingi se nasi wara. Oh, kinyin kini sushi nasi tagi tra chungi tigi tra meba chedu ta tra seva matona ya. Ko shija mebe sheba himba tawe kyo yo ma tigi sushi ngiri se nasi wara. Kinyin kini sushi nasi. Kinyin kini sushi nasi. Nukare. Sumche. Iche. Sushi na. Oh yeah. Kinyin kini sushi na. Is it tuba? Minister, you can socialize. Rami Batesea, any Kibutak so the savage and Tongi or this on the co, Shija maybe Shiba Tagmare, the Shija Sudi Shingi or Esera, or Tina Setene. Any Kibu so Shigi or what? So Sabo Chene, Ton and Zimbe Shiba Tigisura. Chiti tuba mi ne tegi taa tugu wesi gora. Tezamga la nyiringi ko tezamga sigre su ta ti ro rekjanga tele tezamga sigre konde. Su tezam ta tezam ti tezam ro tezam sheche su ta ti rekja tezam su tezam ta tezam ti tezam sigora. O tezamga tele ya nyiri meba che sheba ti tongwe sheba ti tak to nene baro wa sigora. Su du chane tonga ti se trade ya tugu resi gora. Yagi ratwe shebati yu mebe kyo yomara su zingri su sebachen tongri chera. Su sebachen tongri ni trada trida roda richa kanga sebachen tongri vesi gora. Di kanga sangma. Kari se ti tongwe ti tebe shebatu takbari wasi yuandu maru wasi. Yuandu kabri yuchi to kabri yuchi tong kabri yuti matong tindeshene. Yu yudu duza te kenji sheba yudu wani medawa chadu gora. Is it turba chiti means a turba there chiti meditation or this or the Rame Yechirna Yena Yena Sheba Mesera Tradi the Trame Yechina Tradi never manasura Tradi Kadu Tanyibu manasura Try never Matanyibu Meba Nasura China Yena Sheba Mestin try Sebatonga Sheba Meba Shagre. But do it what this one.
Câu kệ số 62, số lượng nói rằng là khi không
So here, if then in response, So the Samkhya sort of responds that there is no fault, that it would follow that there exists a consciousness without an object of which it is conscious, because that awareness, like say if we have our audio awareness perceiving sound, then when there occurs that will sort of transform. It takes on another object. So we have our conscious, again, the Samkhya is trying to say that this self is a permanent kind of awareness or consciousness, and that it never lacks an object, but rather it goes from being a sort of audio consciousness perceiving sound to then perceiving form when you are near that object. However, the sort of problems that arise with that are many. So like, for example, when we say that if again, if the awareness, if the person is permanent awareness, then at the time, like when we see a particular object or hear a particular sound, we can establish for ourselves from direct experience that these are occasional. So if it is the case that the objects perceived by such an awareness are forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and touch are occasional, are objects that only occur at some times and not at others, then those would have to be impermanent, and thereby the kind of consciousness which is perceiving those would also have to be impermanent. So if you reply, again, so they're trying to say that if that very awareness cognizes visual form, so they're trying to say that this awareness, which is a permanent person, in the absence of sound, say, will go and take form as an object. Well, the problem occurs that, well, if you reply that this is because the sound is not nearby, then awareness of that would also not exist. And so here again, if the Samkhya is trying to say that the object has say moved, is no longer there, so the awareness is no longer perceiving sound, it's now perceiving form, well, this entails the fault that such a self, because its object has changed, would also have to be impermanent. That undermines the idea that there could be this kind of permanent consciousness that is the self.
You talk to the you said and the member you saw us. You want to call you are do to us in the middle what I do that. Kibutaba. Rashi be Kibutaba in said. You may do a middle what I do to us. What is you? So here again, where it says in the second half of 62, if you reply that this sound is not nearby, then awareness of that would also not exist. So if they're trying to say that, well, there is this permanent awareness and person, and it's just not perceiving sound because the sound is not close by. Well, if you don't have a sound close by, then you can't have a kind of subject, a mind apprehending sound. And that then undermines the kind of assertion of there being a permanent self. These consciousnesses are dependent upon their objects and thereby lack that kind of permanence and autonomy as the Samkhyas are asserting that they have. Rasung Dindu challenge was Trasebu challenge and Sheba Kayan Bade, Nesu Sebu challenge and Sheba Kalan Jutin Juguma Rese. Karesna, in number gave says so that Trani Chipa Maro Kagarwa. Trade turning your national transangre Sujang Mare. Soothing your ne Tramana could make Patana and so the Tongumato Transangmare Sigora. 자 transit 가인 봐 이순 짐바 지다리 교세 뒤속 저기 말해서 이가 진토고 말해서 그래 야 뒤질람나 제가 니 되던다
Mm. So then the first half of the next verse reads, how can something that is the substance of apprehending of sound be a cognition of visual form? So here, when it comes to our various consciousnesses, like our visual consciousness perceiving form or our audio consciousness perceiving sound, those are of different kinds of natures, such that it doesn't make any sense that our consciousness of sound could somehow take forms as its object, or our visual consciousness could take sound. They're of different natures, and thereby it can't be the same substance or sort of thing that apprehends sound as apprehends form.
nyana tratugure sutong maru sul pami tana tratugoya yo marwa wati diko tanzira shi kaya ba tisu zimba chidar juti su zimba ke yo mare segura imajo yeso ya mo de tindi sa dora chi ne pada punyi de se ane ta ye yanda ni me de se hotel su je lya ora Kibuchi to sala to de pada punyi ga re yo re se Pena sosu pa yube chane sosu pure ra sosu buji yube ne sosu pare ra sa ko ni ga re chog do as wara su da dra ni ga kunyam do jin chog re si wara chi ne pa da punyi to se ta ye ya da ni mi se o de da dra ma re se pa da bu se de tele to de te se tele to de te se ten je de bar jo tu tu gi re te rawa du tu ba chane pa rawa du tu ba de pu rawa du tu ba te de ma re Buddhi kebe chane pasha guyara, rana pa yube chane pusha guyara, sigwara. Oh, ini dosa la tene purjo bashinda. Oh, tene namgyu la tene kuchu lenja guyara. Namgyu la tene su tongu na su tongu yore. Su tong ate su ki rangshin ta, tai rangshin chikba reso, ta ko chu tamze rangshin chikba shari, chisu rangshin sigra. Oh, tene su tong du san trade tongurwa. 대 랑신디 통구와리 제가 껴요 말에 코로나 남주 직 통해서네 수 통구요나야 수대 다이 랑신 소자 자대 통하샤 조그래서 랑신 직버래서 요라 야
Nên cái sắc và thanh là
So here then in the next verse, this is in the first half of 63, this begins with the sort of centrist or the Madhyamaka position, saying that these two, a visual consciousness apprehending form and an audio consciousness apprehending sound, these have different objects. When we're in proximity to sound, we are able to perceive sound, and when we are in proximity to form, we perceive forms. But it's not as though these are of the same nature. They have really different objects. And so the Madhyamakas come forth with, how can something that is in the substance of apprehending a sound be a cognition of visual form? Those consciousnesses have different objects, and therefore they're of a different kind of a nature. And so the reply from the Samkhyas is like, well, a single person may be regarded as either a father or a son, but this is not in terms of reality, only relativistically, which is sort of the centrist reply back to that. So they would say, well, like, look at the way that one person, if you look at their own father, they are a son, but if they have children, they are a father. So too, this one sort of consciousness can be asserted to be apprehending sound or apprehending form, depending upon which of those situation it is in. However, that's not really in accordance with their way of positing reality. These are dependently originated. This example of a father and a son doesn't work to illustrate what they want. They don't have
do do da ne me ba bu me ha ya me se na de go di do tang nyam som cha nyam se chi zo se se ra dang bu yong se de mo bu gang ge yong se de chi zo se sha ra yu du chu ba pen bu yin se ra o de ko se me o ma de ki bu lu ko ya gang ge su de de ru re cha lo so bu ko ya gang ge ko ge chu zhe tu gu yo se yo ra de me ning do som cha nyam ba se niwe ngodelé chi zo so ra tanda dewa dungé tangyom siga ra yido waa da yido me waa da parma drab siga sa ra da yido tanya so chanyam niwe ngo neba tala chi zo siga ra ko niwa de so na ane yido waa da me waa da parma da tindre shija drame da su tugu ye siga ra yido tanya so chanyam niwe ngo juwa tala chi zo siga ra di tanga dambe tenpa yin se ra jitangi tsangma cheba bodhi tiri tili teni kaga yungu yoyise. Tili teni ni loam chenpo seyacho, loam chenpo tiki tili ha yu sukta tiru recha la sopa tongchu. Ni kibu tiki te tongchu, ni kibu tiki loam chenpo la teni sukta tiru recha la sopa longche yore sigora. Chizo wadi sigora.
Ye loam chembo nó khá đây. Loam chembo.
Loam chenpo. Loam chenpo se nga zo miwa drabuda ji sigora. Loam chenpo se sharo. Nga miwa dili teni pajo di su di su cha. Indine kansa mixi di paa tabi ora. O te sunde si ko kibu tege su da tiru risa lo long che dan di sigora. Di loam chenpo dili teni long che yore. Loam chenpo te melong we nipa tabi. Melong we nipa de yu di su shag yore. Ane su shiba de paa tashi tingi buru pechu sherde. Loam chenpo te pechu ko long che yore sigora. O robsi lamne dhiri tate se shirati.
Tư tưởng của người đạo.
So here, just to finish that last one, again, these, according to the Madhyamaka, can be posited sort of relativistically, but not in terms of reality, which is the kind of system that the Samkhyas assert. So next, in verse 64, it says, "For neither sattva, rajas, nor tamas is either the son or the father." And so here, we have to have a little bit of a background. The Samkhya system asserts that this primal substance is an equilibrium of these three sort of elements or constituents, one could say. And this is the material substance that provides all of the kind of necessities of the being, the person who enjoys those various things. And this is kind of like an ultimate truth. It is the creator, the source of all of these various things that are enjoyed by the person. And the way in which the person enjoys these is spoken of as the great intellect, with sort of like a two-sided mirror where something is reflected on one side, the primal substance, and then the other side is what is perceived by the person. So
Ramida Kanga sa Tudu Zuba to Ser Shangu Chan Dramida Sha Nichala in a Dramida Kanga Soja Kanga to read the Wagaja. Other Dramida Chala Mabuso that they one and Sashi Chimadoke or Maratelet in the social order. Such a rate of Cotudu to but the Nivemo native Chisos and tell it any conjure to any Yido Amo so that Trada to the road the Kanga to Yongure Seresido. Until I'm the degree.
So this kind of primal substance, primary substance, is the sort of material of the universe, like the way that those who assert that things are sort of atomically existent when you have like something like dirt or the ground, there are various different things that you can sort of create out of that. And so too, this sort of basic substance of the universe is this material out of which all of these various things are created. It sort of it contains the potential for all effects, which are then experienced by the person through what's called this great mind or intellect, which is like a two-sided mirror, wherein the primal substance sort of reflects on one side and the person is what's on the other. And that's the way that they describe the kind of experience of this primal substance, which is said to be substantially existent. The person is consciousness, and the kind of the way in which they interact is described through this great intellect. But the substance for Samkhyas is what has the kind of potential to bring forth various manifestations. So then the second half of verse 64, where it says, moreover, the substance of visual perception is not seen to entail the cognition of sound. So here again, for the Samkhyas, all phenomena are in the same sort of nature or have the same nature of this primal substance. And so the kind of nature of the apprehension of sound, or the sound that is apprehended, as well as the visual cognition, they would say is in the same sort of nature. And so because form and sound both arise from this sort of primal substance, have the same nature, then this is why that consciousness is able to perceive both. But it is the case that we can see that we can establish with conventional sort of understanding that this is not the case. So again, for them, this primal substance is sort of ultimate truth, and it's not something that we're able to perceive. We can't perceive that nature, but rather what we perceive are sort of the manifestations of that. So therefore, the manifestations
Arkende koile sokba chaje ngama tulo ngama yibata pa mebeso chima shandaji konsune shandaji namju tungu duwasi gora o tina shi su zimbe sheba tege duwa namju te pa shaade ya ran zimbe rangshin tu tonda pa jebu tege yore so tatonga rangshin tu juwe yore si gora o ti ina ni kerange ti ashiri ki jibu te takba yin ngobo yin se tangu yin se so atita kege duwasi ko shene shendu gyurke medabare do asigora karkende bu chu shengi ni tona imita se te kera takba yeset member le ta medabare do asigora ya hotelo
So here, just these, again, for the Samkhyas, these conventional, these sort of various manifestations don't reveal the actual kind of underlying ultimate nature. And so therefore, one wouldn't actually be able to see that they have that same nature, one could say. So as it says, moreover, the substance of visual perception is not seen to entail the cognition of sound. And then in the next beginning of the verse 65, it says, but if the cognition of visual form is the cognition of sound in another form, like an actor, then it is not permanent. So using this example of like an actor who puts on one sort of set of clothing and plays a particular character and then takes that off and puts on other clothing, if it is the case that this consciousness that perceives form then transforms into a consciousness that perceives sound, then again, that undermines the idea that this consciousness, this being, this person is permanent. It's not permanent. To be able to say that, well, the way that we explain the kind of changes in cognition, the way that one is able to move from cognition of visual form to cognition of sound is because that consciousness itself sort of puts on a different guise, like an actor changing costumes, then that is not something that is permanent. You can't say that such an awareness or a permanent self really exists.
Thì như vậy thì Trung Quán mới lập luận, nếu như bạn nói á, nó đã thay đổi thì bạn cho rằng có một cái ngã, cái nhận thức và một cái hữu tình là thường hằng, mà như vậy là không đúng rồi, tại vì nó được biết với nhiều trạng thái khác nhau thì cái nhận thức đó không thể là thường hằng được, tại vì nó đang thay đổi mà, từ nơi cái nhận thức của sắc mà nó chuyển qua nhận thức của âm thanh, giống như người vai diễn họ từ diễn vai này họ đổi qua diễn vai khác, thì làm gì mà có một cái ngã mà cái ngã cái nhận thức mà cái hữu tình thường hằng được. Cho nên cái mà ông của số lượng cho là thường hằng nó không có được, nó bị bác bỏ ở đây, tại vì nó đã thay đổi thì cái vai diễn thì nó đã thay đổi cái trạng thái rồi thì là nó không còn là cái thường hằng nữa.
được rồi cái thế transit tan được đó cái thế suy diễn tình hình na chính như thế này người mình chia sẻ đó cái thế suy diễn tình hình na sẽ cái thế transit về suy diễn đi rồi cái thế transit về sẽ bắt thế diễn được nhiều này số gì bao là số bao tiền để phát nhiều đủ xin là sao cái thế transit về suy diễn rồi số gì tình hình transit đã ra sẽ chia sẻ transit về sẽ bắt ta nika sa transit về sẽ bắt ta tôi cho rằng sẽ chia rồi sẽ cái bà sẽ đại ông mà rồi sẽ rằng sẽ chia yên bản gì đấy cái thế suy diễn tình hình nào sẽ chính như thế này người mẹ chia sẻ transit về thế suy thế transit đó số gì tình hình rồi anh rằng sẽ chia rồi sẽ cái số ra cái ông mà rồi sẽ chia cho nên những cái gì số rồi cái ông mà rồi số đó thì số đó trả tiền như rằng sẽ chia sẻ thì cái người mẹ bé cái sẽ rồi số đó chính như thế này người mẹ chia sẻ người mẹ bé rằng sẽ tăng ăn cho chén trả sự đó trả âm cho thuê đó số sự đó khát đó yếp được sự đó khát đó yếp được đó trả như thế rằng sẽ chia dùng mà rồi con chỗ rằng sẽ chia khéo được đó cái rằng sẽ khát đó rồi trả sẽ thì âm cho coi cái trả sẽ đó số sẽ thì khát đó yếp được mình thuê dùng chỉ đó mình thuê dùng số thì âm cho thuê dùng mà rồi trả thì âm cho thuê mà đó mình thuê dùng mà rồi cho nên như rằng sẽ chia sẻ thì cái người mẹ bé rằng sẽ chia qua chỉ đấy số đó suy diễn tình hình na Chingi tene ngwe me chise. Ngwe mebe rangshi chiba chirima teni rangshi tatere su ta tre ro re je kanga su rangshi be kaga yorwa. Kira cho tamze rangshi chingi sayade ngwe mebe tene ese chire se madriwar sigor tanda. Mo te du lamdir.
Ngôn mế đi là ngôn ngôn ma mế bà ngôn đô
Ngama yomar.
ngôn mế ngôn ma
Karsida?
Ngomane yomares.
Ngwe me angar mebe. Kira saba chire sora. Tene su le kato mi toya kato yibde dan tranyi de rangshi chiba yisede. Kira ngwe ma mebe keje saba re ti yungu ma re ti kande sengur be kaga re rangshi kaga re sora. Rade amjo toya rangshi chachire. Sode kato da yibki rangshi chachire. Ini rangshi chi yisede kira ngwe ma mebe ngar matrak wachi kira trak wade se chachire.
So in the second half of verse 65, then it says, if the cognition of form is another cognition, then that singularity is unprecedented. So here, if they want to say that that sort of consciousness itself changes or transforms, so for example, if we have a visual consciousness apprehending form that somehow transforms into the audio consciousness apprehending sound, but they're still of the same nature, of a singular nature, then such a singular nature is unprecedented. I mean, when we look at form and sound, these are very different things. Form are the objects that we take for our visual consciousness. So things like shape and color, and sound has different qualities. They're of a different nature. So to assert that something which is a permanent substance or a permanent consciousness could take on these sort of different forms or different cognitions, to say that something is of a single nature is unprecedented. Again, because the nature of those various things is not the same. We can see that such consciousness is sort of take on different forms, but by taking different objects, like by taking forms and taking sounds and so forth, to say that something which is truly existent, which is unchanging and singular, transforms or takes those different forms, that is certainly a kind of unprecedented sort of thing to say that such a nature could exist.
Cái tai cũng không thể thấy được sắc, mà cái mắt cũng không thể thấy được âm thanh, không được nghe được âm thanh. Nên là như vậy là số luận ông mà cho rằng nó là nhất thể mà đa dạng, có nghĩa nó cùng một bản thể mà nó nhiều hình dạng khác nhau, giống như là từ biết thức mà biết âm thanh mà chuyển ra biết sắc ấy, thì nó không thể, thì điều đó chưa từng có trước đây. Có nghĩa là trước đây chưa từng có, mà ông mới là bên số luận mới đưa ra một cái điều mà nó chưa bao giờ tồn tại trước đây.
Thế chú sẽ em hình nó sẽ ra để răng cái răng sinh mới sẽ thế chú sẽ được nào ta cái đồ cái tham cái cái tu lô chỉ có sinh ra chỉ có nhà mình ra sang rồi ở trên này chỉ có tổ chức mình ra cho xí bên này tổ chức mình ra cho thì chơi được thế nào. Thì cái chú sẽ thì temba mares temba tru mares là vậy nó sẽ ra răng sinh bảo là phá làm cái ra thế răng sinh cái gì mới sẽ cái chú sẽ được nào thì temba mẹ tổ sẽ là vậy nó ona shebe rangshin chikdu temba kanyin bate me shese. Keran sheba te akpa chikbu rangshin chendu tendamba truba temba truba yin sete laptogu ma re se ora. Su shendu nawa te nawa tatu metemba tsuba re to wa se ora. Tsuba. Su shendu nawa te nawa tatu tsuba yin se na keran te kar se ora. Kete su shen temi na temba mayimba tsuba yin na se te rangi rangshi me se kera a shiri ki kebo te rangi rangshi damba truba yin se rồi trong tâm bát trụ bà yên sẽ thì chỉ ta riêng để mấy sự để trong tâm bát trụ bà riêng mà đấy sẽ cũng xem này xem được nhiều rồi thì cũng giúp thì này xem đã từ này sẽ theo cũng giúp để đủ đấy sẽ gọi là tin được đấy.
Số luận nói rằng cái
So then, in the first half of verse 66, it says then, if you claim that the other mode of consciousness does not truly exist, then say what is its natural form. So here, if one is to say that this consciousness has some kind of transformation such that it goes from perceiving forms to perceiving sounds, then it can't be the case that it is truly existent as it appears. And if you are to say, well, no, there's no fault in that, it makes this kind of transformation. If there is a consciousness which is sort of really truly established, then how could it possibly sort of have that kind of transformation? If something is ultimately existent, then it has to sort of be existent in the way that it appears. But here, this has the kind of nature of transforming, and if it is false, if it is not really existent in the way that it appears, then it wouldn't possibly be ultimately existent.
Shiriki kibu chingi do temba truba yino shena sura. Shiriki kibu chingi tu chen teta na se. Shenyi chena teta na se. Shiriki kibu roa. Shiriki kibu ni temba truba yino shena sura. Shenyi chena se. Teta na se. Te temba truba yina sura. Yu tadebe kibu kun. ene 직도 타완 요케레스 오라 기구 직도 타완 요스 규타데 바 따다 발라 메다 하다 데상마 ene 유치바데 로레스 오라 기구 직도 타완 요르세 아 기부그 직도 타완 요데 기부그 참에 딱겹도 내가 차체주 메세도라 다도서 차체주 메세 차체 메나니 찌르시레도 거라 아주 달리는 차체에 마모요랑아 또 치도 미다 지다 스타시 참아 붙여요라 그 참에 찌 군접식도 참에 식체 군접식 다 되고 남가 동배서로 찍샤 근데 르멘다멘다 나 랑베고선 때나 다데 슈두게서로 쉐고라 다 참에 찌 강사 강가 찍르지는 거라 다 강가 찍르 차도 거라 어디서 시행이 지나 대단하세 아시르기 기부쟁이 엠바드바니도 셴나세라 징이 제나세 대단하서 어떤데 임바이나서라 규타데베 가서 상마 에네치도 타완주르레서라 이거 규타데 이게 따다 발람메다 할서와 교그 지도 타완주 규치바데도 그래서라 그래서 상마 찍바데도 그래서 찍레도 그래서라 그러니까 기구의 찍도 타원 주시 semba seme teda jase sem yebada sem meba teda chama sura semba chenda sem meba teda jase chame chigina ni chigmado shayo mara chame chigsede ko kelingra chache chigume gedine semba da semba meba tezo jase ora semba seme teda ja chigyur kanchire yunyi chonsa ta sem yungeda sem mebe ngobu changma tamje desiro yambula soba sheba da dudu tuba changma ane yuda kya chikdu tadu desiro karesina chami chikri chami takyabdu yosigdo ase chachiye yomare akbare changma kunjabde chikra chachiye yomare kanga taa chikbare mi kanga taa chikbare tatapalan taa chikbare deora 저는 중배실에서 이거야. sembe 대다자 지규 강실 위원이 총세 상만 참여 찍으려고 그래서 야. 어 되게 스트라 캐션 보면
Mm.
Cho nên Trung Quán nói nếu rằng
So here again, continuing with the second half of verse 66, if again, and the assertion of the Samkhyas is that if a being is again, this sort of consciousness is said to take on other modes, but it really exists as a single kind of substance with a single nature. And so, if you claim that this kind of single nature is truly existent without any sort of parts, then it would become the case that that consciousness itself is the sort of character that is truly existent, then it would follow that all sentient beings would become one. So here again, for them, they're trying to assert that there's no sort of problem in the fact that there's a single sort of a conscious or aware being that is truly established. For them, they think that that kind of pervasive self pervades all sentient beings. And in that way, if you are to assert that, then all of these beings with different continuum would follow that they would become one because of the fact that you assert some kind of permanent partless being. And so therefore as well, it would follow that sentient beings who are aware, who are conscious, and that which is this primal substance, which is material and without mind, it would also follow that those would become one. And why is that? Well, it's because you assert that there is this all-pervasive partless permanent, and thereby all of those sentient beings would be the same. And so if those existed, then they would be truly existent as one. So here, if you reply, as it says in the second half of 66, consciousness itself is sort of the natural form of cognition. Because of the sort of assertions that they made, that this is something which is permanent and partless, then it entails the unwanted consequence that all conscious beings are identical. They're sort of like those different the different continua of sentient beings would collapse into one.
남주신 대부 강가를 남주세들 지속파 주상긴 대부도 소리서 자외랑 신남버는 경매라서 지속의 교장장 교코나를 맞은 대부 말에 현다도서 강가 가서래 자외랑 신남버 좀 전부 소중랑 신남주 주주분은 남버 줘 현다 강가 남주된 거라 지속의 주변 남주된 거라 안제 지자 신지 로서도 대대 남주르게 지자 만들어 소다 테러를 잘라 써봐 어 때도 참아서거라 남주르 제부 연계 강가 지소의 교체 요코나시 현다 내부에서 대대 남주르게 지자 만들어 때도 참아서거라 간세 지자 친지로서 때도 참마 친지로 준비이나서 나왔다도 몇대만 준비이나서거라 남주르게 지자 만들어 소다 테러를 잘라 써봐 때도 강가 친지로 나오는 시 따다 매봐 준비이나서거라 근데 친지로 그래서 다에 때가 계속 참아 탐자리야 다와 탐경기 지소어디야 중경기 지소어디야 아니 템바 마주바 준비된도 그래서라 지소어디야 강이 바태야 아니 템바 주바리 마레세 준비된도 그래서 남유강가 준비되도 와서라 아주 진짜 친지로 그래서 다에 때서 정말은 다와 지소도 경기 랑시 지소 가이마티아 준비를 치질로 된다고 그래서라 무도아 그래요
tổng chủ là
So here, I forgot to read with the last section, that which the first half of verse 67, which says, that which has volition and that which lacks it would be the same because their very being is equivalent. So that's the sort of thing that was established above. And now here, the second half reads, if a specific entity is deceptive, what corresponding basis does it have? So here we need to understand that according to the Samkhya tenets, all of things that we consider to be results, and here the text I'm reading uses the word perturbations, the sort of manifestations of that primal substance that arise as various results, these they assert to be deceptive. And the primary substance, this primal substance that is the sort of material for all of those manifestations, is only the cause. That is something that's never the result, it's only the cause. And so all of these manifestations, they say, arise as results, those results being deceptive or false, but the cause itself is supposed to be truly existent. So if the specific entity is deceptive, what corresponding basis does it have? How could it come from something truly existent?
Yudi yuwa yana sheba de la se yore, yudi mewa shasana sheba de matonga de dura. Yu suda de ru recha la soba ko, kashe saba ki, kashe jigro te chude. Di tongen sheba de la yuwa du yora. Sheba de la ko naya ge nawa kukure, ane wangbu la soba mewa nawa chawa la soba kore, tezo le tene, drene ane sheba de la nangurwa. Sankara ta takba yin se, yu sheba takba yin se, te yungu ma re se gora. Yun dame dan yun du du sa ne sheba den yun du gura yamane yu chi shen so na ni tu de ta ba re shen shen ba tra yu na me na tra shen shen ba che te gura su yu na me na su shen shen ba de te ma ro su sa ba le so sa ba ki gre ji so ne ji du ra a ko yu de yu chen so na ne yu de tong ye ge shebe den me wa na wa che wa le wa na so ba te zo yu ko ra se me se chi de yong gura den rel te ne sheba de yu shen ko ra yu shengen sheba le ya meda phase ma to takba winchap a yenge takba yenge tilsu maung ba la ta na shi tenge ta da takba yenge chame se te kondu tende khele do chame ba ta chame chi gre se cha cha ni chi kyu me ba chame ma mu khele gre chi ru ba na ta chame se ta kanga chi gi se gre se do nga zo semje kanga ta kanga chi gi se go ra nam ga tong ba re chi ne nam ga chi wa ra tong san jo ra ti ne che tong ba ne ti na kanga yong gu ra मैं बचाने या नाम का रेड करा होती नहीं है ता दे तिंडे जिखेले गोरा नाम बचने आ कांगा खागा खागा सोसलते हैं लोग सुटुबरा आ दे जो चेंज मा तो तक बचना है हमारे ते हा कोने डिगोरे ता तुंदा ते ओती शेगे वरा ने ता दे तंदम तेंबा ये सिगरे मारे चिसो दे तंदम तेंबा ये से ओ तेले तेने ने कांगा ट्युगरे सरा को samlo yo mare ya kibulo koya kanga 농자야 강가데 데데 고게 데데 고고 산파 듀 수데 강가 치르잖아 알아주네 셰바 매나니 텐데 제싱 마로 이불로 가르고 마고데 콘데바 하고 마로 셰바 매나 티 따티 데가 마레세 아 딱지 라와차 참메 버데 데가 마레 다 참메네 가사 강가 다 찍된도래 나주 강게 다 치래 데 데가 마다 카가 요 무슨 주부도 안 가자 소소소 다이 카가 임니다 Oh, this security, Rob the Hawk on the jury, that it's over it, yeah.
So here, in terms of what's being refuted here, again, according to the Samkhyas, if the person is consciousness and awareness and so forth, and they assert that the person is a kind of permanent, conscious, aware, permanently conscious and aware, this is negated by the fact that our objects are changing. We have new objects which arise and objects go away. And so it's only in connection with the coming together of an object and a sense power that we give rise to a particular cognition, a visual cognition or an auditory cognition, nasal taste, and so forth. And so if it were the case that there were such a permanent self or person that were conscious, they would have to remain even without an object, which is not sort of possible. That's not the way that this works, but rather these are impermanent. Our various consciousnesses arise only in the coming together of an object and a power and a consciousness. And so here again, they assert that our various all beings are pervaded by a kind of single, solitary, unitary self. Now, here again, a lot of what is being refuted is the idea of a permanent self. To say that there is something permanent and enduring and is conscious, we can refute through seeing the various occasional objects that come up to our consciousness. But to say that this is unitary in the sense that is all pervasive, like we have this environment because there is space. If there were no space, you couldn't have this kind of environment. So for them, space is like, the self is what pervades all sentient beings. And it's kind of this unitary self pervading all beings. Now, this is not a logical kind of conclusion. There would be the fault that there would not be individual continua, but all sentient beings would become one. And so too, if it were the case that you have this being that is conscious and then this kind of primal substance that is materiality, which is supposed to bring forth all the various things which are needed by that being or that person, that is unconscious. How does it know what is needed by this being that has volition and mind? There would be sort of no connection between that. So these verses, really, the main thing that we're getting at in refuting this school is the idea that there could be a permanent conscious being. We can see that objects change. Something that is conscious is not permanent. That's undermined there. And also that there can't be this sort of materiality and then an all-pervasive consciousness. This all-pervasive consciousness would mean that all beings would become one. There would not be these sorts of individuals, and there are problems that come from that. And also, if we have this kind of material primal substance and then a permanent being that is somehow supposed to enjoy it, that is consciousness, there's sort of materiality and consciousness with no connection between them. So these are the various kinds of reasonings that are put forth in order to refute some of these non-Buddhist assertions, particularly the assertion of a permanent, unitary, autonomous self.
Chitraba, Chitraba, Pembo Daba, Tika Yora. Chitraba, Chiruba, and the Hindu teach. Okitenga says to Sanga, and Chitraba, Sigura. Ta Pembo is Pembos and a tutu tuba de Pembo Sigra. Tutu tuba. Sachu Melolas a Tugia, Son, Sashang, Desukanga Pemboroa. Sakangba, Chitazula, Wakangutezuka, Tutu tuba Kanga Pembo Sigora. Oh, Tenika Soda. The temple is 22 by Ensigor. That's all so much low to then get it 22 by or Tindra is Samurtan and Kote. The temple is Sigora. The window is Sheba in Sigora. You might raise a Kagacheswa. It's Takpa Tembaset, and they talk about Tembasha, Takpa Temple is Sigora. In that, the temple is a 22 by Ensigora. You got Yore. Nambachaneta, the Sheba Mare. You got so that you to Trubaya Mare. Sopo de tutu trubare, Sheba loga yore, Sheba de tutu truba mare. Then ye le tesole tene tagbe, Aj shaura. Tesu nyamdo yo denge, tesole tene tagbe. Tesu lega chito, nyamdo lega chitenge, tas, tene tagba samla ta shaura mado. Tina ne chik de yin cheche, Rama hachi munsi che yo marwa. Unche za pembo ya mare, Sheba tagba ta tendre marwa. Demin dochi segra, taade. 어디 경기 컨디 셈 채우면서 수 뭐불 숨마도 요 말에 남버스나 수 셰바 데멘도 지시라 어때서 망쳐가 돼 수마도 매베스도 지기도 얘데 가르 수요래 사추 멜론 조안 미 레바트 강가 수르 마도 셰바차 통구 말와 메신다 텐데날 셰바 토야게 요 말와 수르 장장마도 매베스도 지라 강가 이래 남버스는 수요래 수트트트저 뚜뚜뚜베 수시라 수체라 근데 셰바세 세시르바 뚜뚜뚜와 마이게 세리게 차지 수리에 까브르까브르 땡기거래 이나한테 매나야 코라코라 인도에시 와라 수제 셰바 세시르바 셰베세시라 수수로와 수세들 미게 통에 가도 입다 자다 쥐다 로다 렉잘 소바 강가 수래 나가 수세 지식도 하대 미게 통에 데 조선자 텔 수스랍샤르바 신신다 자티 로 렉자 강가 수래 유튜브에 수래 되어라 수제 셰바 세시르바 셰바시라 네 수시 가야 많이 버시 뭐 버시와라 수다 셰바를 때는 봤다 생각 뭐 버쳐 생각 막 보여라 일에 되면 도시시라 랑게 뭐 수다 많이 수다 데바 많이 수게 뭐 데바 많이 그러니까 셰베 뭐 데바 많이게 뭐 연계 치워라 일에 되면 도시시라 수 셰바 되면 도시시 숨셔라 간사데 수를 배스네 수 말에 수 요래 셰바를 배스네 셰바 말에 셰바 요래 간사데 가르스네 수다 셰바니를 때네 딱배 뒤제치래 뭐 버치래고 되면 도시시라 다단다 내가 수디 다데 뱀보이 두두두바이 시거라 디바가위 왔다 디수냐
vậy là tứ cái trúc vào là nó tứ vào
뚜. 라다다다 샤쿠뚜 라도.
수스는 카도다 입디라 나 유튜브에서 사주 멜론 뛰어라 뒤텐데 되어라 뒤텐데 가시라 들치시라 아 사주 멜론라 서봐도 뒤시 뒤두주바시라 가시라 에tam세 말아 에tam세 데
Adam, yeah. So here, then we turn to a new section, which is a refutation of those that assert a material kind of a self, like the Vaisheshikas or other Hindu schools. So there are major Hindu schools that assert various things. And we saw that the Thabkhe as above asserted that the self was consciousness, that it was different from the kind of main substance that was substantially existent. And so here, the Vaisheshikas would say that no, the self is not consciousness, but rather it's material. It is like our substantially existent body, composed of particles and so forth. So here, for Buddhists, and particularly the Prasangikas, they would say that the self, the person, is not some sort of substance, not substantially existent or like composed of atoms, and neither is it consciousness, but rather it's something that is merely designated on the basis of those. We're not able to identify something either within the material form or consciousness that is the person. So here, when it comes to a sort of broad categorization of things, we can talk about three different categories. There's form, which, I mean, the definition of form is that which is suitable to be form. And usually we're thinking about like visual forms, like color and shape and so forth. But the rest of those objects of like taste and touch and so forth, that's also form, materiality. And then we have the second category, which is consciousness or mind. And mind is that which is clear and knowing. These are all composites in the sense of being things composed from causes and conditions. So when when it comes to our sort of like scientific discovery and so forth, most of it focuses on that which is atomically composed, forms, those things which can be identified by machines, whereas mind, which is clear and knowing, is not really as apparent to those. And then there is this third category of what is sometimes called non-associated compositional factors. We could say that which isn't form or material nor mind. So this includes something like the person, which cannot be identified as those particles upon which, like as the atomic particles of our body, nor can it be identified in the moments of our mind, but rather it is something which is merely designated independence on that collection of aggregates, on the collection of body and mind. And so this is something which is a composite. It is a compounded thing that is subject to causes and conditions, but it doesn't fall into either of the categories of being form, the material, or mind. So here we have first refuted in the Samkhya view the idea of a self that is consciousness or awareness. And then there's the idea that we'll next refute, which is of those schools like the Vaisheshikas that assert a material self.
Semi nichir pungso chi, ta mayin de semi bechir chi, semi, ta semi korwa, long cheba pungchirwa, kiti sange, chi long che ngech korwa, ni semi na long che eke omarwa. Semi nichir pungso chi se. Ta de ne tembu mayin, tutu chuba mayin de, semi bechirwa, semi na ta rigi mare se kora. Semi paya ta mayin de, semi bali ya, long che ta le sa ete de omara. Seme nyeshir pumso shir pena pumba shinos pumba kawa kangba to arig marwa ko semyo marwa otina shir sora when semdan dembe shir shena nuka se meshe jigbarta ore when semdan demba te de tan drawa chene ene ko yushe thugure sena kora mashena semdan de shenda ge drawa chene ene yushe thugure sena sora and the same that them be sure she na se mission you and the ne karate takpa yin se the take mar so the devotion to do shlam san yi la and it's also
So-
sorry
So just to read this verse, hopefully we'll get done with these non-Buddhist schools and it'll get a little bit easier. But so just to read verse 68, it says, that which is not conscious is not I, because it lacks consciousness, just like a cloth and so on. So when we talk about a self or an I, it's an experiencer. It's the one who engages in karmic acts, virtue and non-virtue. So how could that which lacks consciousness be the I? That's not logical. And so if you counter that it is conscious since it is conjoined with consciousness, like the self itself is not conscious, but rather it's conjoined with consciousness, then it would follow that the non-conscious entity would vanish. So if you try to say, well, the self is not really conscious, but it's endowed with mind, then its material or unconscious nature is undone. That kind of negates that. So when that consciousness becomes the nature of the self, like if it's the conjoining with mind that makes that able to be an experiencer, then that previously unconscious self would change and thereby undermining your idea of a permanent self. So we'll be able to continue this next time and get through these.
Open the page 43, mandala offering.
Thank you very much.
Shingam Bhuva Sho Om Benza Bume Aho Wonje Sege Sa She Om Benza Rege Aho Chijare Koyo Ge Gowe Uso Re Ge Bo Re Rab Sha Le Wa Po Lon Za Chan Che Chan Drami Lu Dan Lu Ba Nga Yab Dan Nga Yab Shen Yuen Den Dan Lam Jo Jo Drami Nyen Dan Drami Nyen Gen Da Rinpo Chen Re Wo Pa San Ji Shin De Che Pa Mame Pa Ye Lo Do Ko Lo Rinpo Chen Nubo Rinpo Chen Sumo Rinpo Chen Lambo Rinpo Chen Tajo Chen Tajo Rinpo Chen Mabe Rinpo Chen Te Che Ma Ye Pumba Ye Ma Chewa Ma Lo Ma Garma Mendo Ma Tube Ma Nase Ma Chija Ma Ni Ma Da Wa Rinpo Chen Tu Chole Namba Yewe Gen Zen Oso Lada Miem Job Son Zop Ma Zawa Me Wa Zang Shin Yi Do Wa Te Da Chen Chen Zawa Dan Gyuwa Jebe Panden Lama Tamba Nam Keba Doya Yongye Gewe Shenyen Chenpo Gen Rinpo Chen Shengane Tekwa Chenpe Sunje Samo Shuyi Yendo Shingam Biwa Kewa Tujin Drove Tendo Shekso Shene Janda Son Drawa Mangyo Namge Tada Nyembe Semjen Tamje La Tsuchewa Chenpe Goni Sishin Chodan Tumonge Ngodro Maliwa Tsedo Sue Sajen Bege Chonshen Re De Gambadi Sangye Shinde Dembe Dogenam Daishin Raja Vaishu Sai Ge Be Shon Shen Me Lo Dam Re Shin De Gambadi Sangye Shinde Me Dembe Waye Dogenam Daishin Lache Vaisho Saye Bege Shon Shen Me Lordam Re Shin De Gambode Rising Bege Shon Rogen Nanda Shin Che Vaishu Sai Ge Bege Shon Shen Me Lo Dam Re Shin De Gambode Sangye Shinde Me Dembe Waye Dogen Nam Da Chevasho idam guru rana mandala kanaya tayami Gewandi nyudo da lama sangye drujone Doa chigamalewa te salakavasho Chanju senjo rimboche majewanam keguche Gewanyamba mewayang kone kondo pewa isho. Okay, Tung, before we do the Vietnamese dedication, tomorrow we have no class. So in Saturday we have class. We start at 7 p.m. and then Sunday morning we have class from 10 to noon. Okay.
Is it language or
No, the Pandita teaching.
Yes. Dạ, rồi chưa nói là ngày mai mình không có lớp, thứ bảy mình có lớp từ 7 giờ tối tới 9 giờ giống như thường lệ. Nhưng mà chủ nhật thì sáng chủ nhật mình có lớp từ 10 giờ tới 12 giờ trưa. We don't have class Sunday afternoon. Sunday no, yeah. Tối chủ nhật mình không có lớp.
Do the Vietnamese dedication.
Yeah. Nguyện đem công đức này hướng về khắp tất cả đệ tử và chúng sinh đều trọn thành Phật đạo. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, bây giờ mình đứng lên lại thầy, tạ ơn thầy.